Welcome to the Principal's Perspective, where we explore what it really takes to lead a school and why great leadership is a way of being and a set of skills that can be learned. I'm Dr. Adrian Camm.
And I'm Teagan Collins. Whether you're leading a school, an organisation, or preparing for your next leadership move, we're here to break down the strategies, challenges, and real life moments that define leadership today.
This podcast is your guide to navigating leadership with clarity, confidence, and impact.
Let's get into today's episode.
What's been happening?
Life is rich and full, as one of my colleagues likes to say. Our colleagues. Had a challenging morning.
Tell me more.
None of it was diarised or scheduled on my list to do, but I had a really challenging conversation with a young man who's finding it difficult to get to school. And his father out in the car park, and it was one of those, I was on my morning walk around campus and bumped into them, and it just put me back into the space of how challenging it can be for some of our young people just to get here every day and what goes on behind closed doors. So that was a tricky conversation. And then I walked into my office thinking, okay, we're getting ready for podcast. We'll close the loop on the conversation I'd just had. And then our deputy popped her head into my office and said, have you got a minute? Of course, was my answer. And we started talking about, are we getting the communications right around the 2026 structure of the day, which we've just done a big review on the start of next year and the timetable and structure and all the flow and effects of that. And we'd been working on the communications back and forward. We're happy with where they're at. But then we just did a bit of a sense check on, have we nailed it? We hit the right level, thinking about all our stakeholders. What have we missed? Wasn't quite the morning I had planned, but important nonetheless. What about you? How was your morning?
My morning was good. It starts early. I have a fair commute to work each day, which I don't mind because of where I live. So I was up at 5:30 and playing dad, and my 3-year-old son wanted to really play the iPad this morning. And I said, no iPad. I said, you've got to have breakfast. And he said, iPad first, then breakfast, because he's still learning to talk. And I said, no iPad. And he said, what about 10 minutes? And I said, no iPad. He said, how about 100 minutes?
The art of negotiation.
The art of negotiation. And I thought that was really funny. So that was a nice start to my day, actually. And it's a nice segue into the focus of our podcast episode today, which is having conversations that matter. So we're going to talk about some of our experiences and thoughts and beliefs around having conversations that matter, navigating challenging conversations or difficult conversations, providing constructive feedback, fostering a culture of open dialogue, and having the courage to really lean into those things and not shy away from them. So I think, what does it all mean? Why do you do it? How do you do it? And what happens if you don't?
How do you like to receive feedback?
Directly, timely, constructively. Don't give me a shit sandwich. And what I mean by
The
that,
hamburger.
yeah, the hamburger. and what I mean by that is, don't start with something warm and fuzzy, land the feedback, and then try and end with something warm and fuzzy. That's not going to work for me. Don't beat around the bush. And I value honesty. So be honest. And I hope I've created a space for people to be able to give me that sort of feedback and not be too anxious or scared about the position I hold in the school, because I'm part of the team. I'm part of the collective. I'm just one person in a large human-centered organisation, and I need to be receiving feedback too. And so I want feedback, because that's how you grow. How do you like it?
Similar, and I'll elaborate. I like it in person and face-to-face where possible, because the story I tell myself is, well, why couldn't they have that conversation with me when we had coffee together, or when I passed them in the yard, or when we had our one-on-one meeting? When we unpack that, often it's that they wanted to get it right. They wanted to make sure they said it in the right way.
Yeah.
That they were coming at it from the right lens.
This is if they provide it over email.
Over email,
Yeah.
yeah. But the way I value is the conversation and being able to have the feedback delivered, open, honest, transparent, timely, all those things, but then to be able to have a conversation about it.
It should always be in person. I guess the caveat to that is if something happens in an interaction and you go away and think about it and you reflect and you're not happy with how it went, I think there's an avenue then to do a follow-up email with the person to say, hey, Teagan, listen, I've just been reflecting on the conversation we had earlier today or yesterday. I wasn't entirely happy with how it went. I'm wondering if we can schedule another time to talk through it.
Of course, absolutely. I like it when it's relatively immediate. Not that perhaps it happened 5 minutes before and then it's a reactive piece and then you think, is that meaningful? Or perhaps it's the most meaningful form. I think the context is important to, like to receive it in the right context. But that's a lot of caveats on the way that we like to receive feedback, and it's a really complex topic of conversation.
It is, and because not everyone's the same. Not everyone likes to receive feedback. Some people don't like feedback, positive or negative, or constructive, or however you want to frame it. Some people want it all the time.
Too much.
And some people are somewhere in the middle. It's really interesting. Have you ever been subject to the situation where someone will send you an email on a Friday and say, Teagan, we need to meet on Monday to discuss some concerns I have?
I have.
And they don't give you any detail.
I have.
How do you respond to that?
3:30 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, ping in my inbox, and I don't think I slept all weekend.
Is that the worst example of a leadership practice ever?
Shocking.
So bad.
It's up there. And of course I catastrophized it and thought I was losing my job on Monday morning and was so nervous. And it was something so minor. And the story I told myself was much worse than what had actually come to pass. But then we talk about when we give that feedback. I know that someone that we worked with closely for some time says no bad news on a Friday. But I don't think it's bad news, but it's just that context and timing around when we provide feedback. Definitely no emails. But even thinking if someone receives an invite request for a meeting from our office, if we don't provide that context, that can be fear-inducing.
You don't need to create that sort of environment. So be specific. And I think it comes down to communication. And communication is at the heart of effective leadership. And communication or communication skills are at the heart of our topic today for this episode, which is having conversations that matter. So for me, if you don't have conversations that matter, what's going to happen? Relationships are going to break down. Performance is going to suffer. There's no accountability. And as a result, the culture of the school or the organisation is going to, I think, not be where it needs to be. What else?
Or we're prepared to have conversations with certain people that matter.
Right.
Because we know the people in our teams who are open and receptive to feedback, so we give them more.
Or we have good relationships with them, and so we feel as though there's an established base of trust, so we can lean into those conversations. But we shy away from those one-on-one interactions or relationships with our colleagues, perhaps where that trust is not there. Because we catastrophize. How are they going to receive this? I'm getting anxious about this conversation. How's it going to land with them? How do I broach this issue with them? Because perhaps I've let it slide for the last 3 months. So it's going to come as a real shock and surprise to them now when I want to address it.
One thing that you said to me early days of our work together was no one enjoys difficult conversations.
That's why they're called difficult.
And you're never going to get to a point, I think it was before I was heading into what I was perceiving that was going to be a really difficult parent conversation about their child. And you said to me, Teagan, if you were looking forward to having this conversation, there would be something wrong. No matter how organised you are, how prepared, how much you know ethically, morally, from a values perspective, that this is the right path to take and it's the right conversation to be having, if you were walking into this thinking, oh, no issue here, then there would be something wrong. And that stuck with me in terms of the clear is kind message, not only for the staff we work with, but also for our families and students too.
that way you feel personally before engaging in a difficult conversation, that's what makes you human. And you don't ever want to lose that, because there's a real fear that I have if you've been a principal for a long time and you get exposed to different things and you're dealing with wonderful, positive stories, but on the flip side to that, really brutal, negative, traumatic situations and experiences. There's a real danger, I think, that if you're in the role for long enough, you become a little bit hardened. Now, that can be a good thing to an extent, but you never want to lose what it is that makes you human. And so that emotion is absolutely normal. I remember back, I'm going to say 10 years ago, it was probably a little bit longer, I was still really uncomfortable having these sorts of conversations. So it's not a natural thing, but it is a skill that can be learnt. And there are some strategies that you can put in place to make these things easier and for them to be more productive. But I remember a specific example of a difficult conversation I had in my first senior executive role. And it was a conversation that I'd put off for almost 2 years. 2 years. And so this relationship with this person was not good for 2 years.
It's a long time.
So long. I don't know what happened, but one day I got the courage to actually say, I need to have this conversation, and this relationship isn't going to be repaired or fixed unless I do something about it. And so I was anxious. I thought about it. I hardly slept. I tried to prepare. How's this conversation going to go? And you know what? It wasn't as bad as what I thought it was going to be. By the time we finished, we're never going to be best friends, but we'd come to an understanding. And we'd come to an understanding that we needed to be able to have a productive working relationship together, and there were ways that we could do it. And a lot of the relationship breakdown that had occurred over the previous 2 years was due to a misunderstanding and some miscommunication between the two of us. And so it wasn't actually as bad as what we thought it was. Isn't it amazing?
And you spent 2 years
2 years.
ruminating on it.
2 years.
Yeah.
So now I'm really passionate about not ever letting that happen ever again, because it doesn't have to. And the work that we do with our staff and with our students is providing them with the skills and the training to be able to have these conversations in a meaningful and productive way.
There's an art to it.
There's an art. There's also a science. It's an art and a science.
I feel strongly it's our ethical and moral obligation as stewards in our roles of the school, and our collective responsibility in the faith that parents put in, the trust they instill in us, to have these conversations with our colleagues or with parents or with our students, so that we, for the greater good, are holding ourselves to account. It's our job.
It is our job.
To lead, to manage, to have difficult conversations so that people know where the expectation is.
Totally. And we can't be the school we want to be if we're not having these conversations. So it's a non-negotiable. So before we get into, I guess, some practicalities in terms of how perhaps you and I approach these sorts of conversations, some of the work we've done here with our staff at the school in order to equip them with the confidence and the capability to be able to engage in these sorts of conversations, why don't we talk about some specific examples? What are we talking about? What are some scenarios that happen daily, weekly, monthly in our environment, in a school environment, in a business environment, where conversations need to be had? Like, I can think of one. Someone sends a passive-aggressive email. Now, if you don't provide that person with the feedback, how are they going to know that the email they sent was passive-aggressive? Maybe they intentionally sent it, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they weren't aware that it was going to be passive-aggressive, and it was just in the heat of the moment, they responded, they were busy, they had 100 emails to get through in the inbox, they were about to rush off to their next meeting. There could be a range of factors as to why that email didn't land with the intent that it was delivered. So you need to have the conversation. Now, that's a really simple example of, Teagan, that email you sent me yesterday, are we okay? Because the way I was interpreting that email was that it was quite passive aggressive. And one of two things is going to happen then. You're going to say to me, oh, yeah, I was actually a bit angry about that. So then we can talk about it. Or you'll say, oh, my God, that was not what I intended. I am so sorry. But we've had the conversation. Now we can move on. What are some other examples?
For me, something that rings true is the standard you walk by is the standard you accept. So if I see something and I let it go, that's signaling to that person that I accept that behaviour. And by extension, it's accepted at school, within our community. You walked past me having a conversation with some of our young men yesterday.
I did.
Who perhaps made some decisions that don't align with our values as a community. And if I had have just kept walking and not chosen to have that conversation with them, they would say, oh, Miss Collins just walked past and she saw us doing that, so I'm okay to keep doing it. And if Miss Collins as the associate principal is prepared to accept that, then why shouldn't my Year 7 English teacher, as an example? Things like professional dress, conversations that our families might have with a staff member around our code of conduct. So many conversations that could be perceived as difficult conversations, perhaps by some, or perceived as necessary conversations by others, are really important that we have, but also that we empower others. They're not easy, but that's why with our staff particularly, we've included that as part of our Learning to Lead professional development program through that growth approach. How do we have difficult conversations? How do we broach them? With my team specifically, the team I work with day in and day out, we explicitly ask each other, how do you like to receive feedback? Just as you asked me at the start of our conversation today, so that inevitably when there's time to provide that feedback, we're doing everything to set it up for success.
I think there's layers to this conversation. In my experience, and definitely the culture we're creating here at the school, the earlier and the quicker that you have a conversation with someone, the less likely it is that whatever the issue is will escalate, because you can basically get it before it becomes bigger than what it needs to be. And so we both approach those conversations quite informally initially. So you might just go and talk to a staff member in the yard and say, hey, those shoes that you're wearing today, not quite sure they're appropriate for our environment. Maybe consider a different pair tomorrow. Or it might be just having a quiet word with someone who perhaps spoke inappropriately at a staff briefing and just saying to them, I'm not quite sure if you're aware, but did you realise you came across as a bit aggressive? Having those conversations early and often is where we need to get to, and is a lot of our focus at the moment here at the school. But then I think the next layer is something that's a bit more challenging. So give me an example of a conversation that might be a bit more challenging and might require a sit-down one-on-one. It's not a performance management conversation, but it's a conversation that you need to address seriously. Let's say a staff member in your office. Give me a scenario and talk me through how you approach that, Teagan.
There's a few situations or scenarios running through my mind. It might be that we've received several parent complaints about a staff member, or a really significant parent complaint. It could be that it has been low level for some time and it's escalated through our chain of responsibility, and therefore it ends up in my office, as an example. It could be the step before misconduct, but from a severity perspective, it might sit there. So there's a lot of different scenarios. As an example, if we say we've had some complaints from our community about the way that a staff member has interacted or behaved. And I suppose the other caveat to this too is that we like to make sure that whoever's received the initial complaint, it's not just handballed up the chain, but it sits at the appropriate level. And I think that goes without saying. If it comes to a head of school and it's appropriate for them to have the conversation, then we encourage our colleagues on executive to be able to have those conversations. So it doesn't just sit with you and I, and we're not seen as the bearer of all bad news. But if I'm preparing for a conversation like that, I like to make sure I have all my facts. There can be two sides to the truth. Two people can be right at the same time. The truth is always somewhere in the middle, which is along that continuum somewhere. And there's always the grey. So how do we make decisions without complete information despite our best efforts? So gathering as much information as I can, but knowing that likely as I prepare for the week or the next day, sometimes these meetings pop up pretty quickly, always coming from a place of curiosity and a place of compassion.
Yeah.
But from my experience, it's very rare that people are trying to do the wrong thing and that they set out with intent to do the wrong thing. And it's not all intent based. It can't be, because that's what the system's set up for. But coming from that place of curiosity and understanding, seeking their side of the story, gaining an understanding of what's happened and what's transpired, but also at the same time holding strong to our values and beliefs and our moral and professional obligations within that. Do we have an upset member of our community? And how are we restoring that trust and that relationship as well? Does there need to be a formal process or formal investigation, or does it really sit with me and in my office and scope of work? So opportunity to hear, making sure I've got enough time in my calendar, as an example, making sure it's not backing on to another meeting, or it's a really, 15-minute time slot and that's not enough for the conversation. So just making sure I have all the parameters right, that they haven't rushed from morning mentor period as an example, and then they're rushing off again to period 2, that they've got space in their day. It's not at 4:00 on a Friday and they're then going to go away and think about it over the weekend. So setting it up for success is important to me in my work when having difficult conversations with people. So the setup, context, do I have all the information that I need?
Yep.
When I've got that point, sitting down with a staff member, coming from a place of curiosity and understanding, seeking how they feel rather than going in thinking that I do have all the answers. And then it's that piecing together of the situation, professional judgment in the moment. Where do we go from here? What restorative action needs to happen? Does there need to be any further follow-up or documentation? Are they then on an improvement plan? What steps does it take from there? Then the follow-up is really important. Is the follow-up via an email? Is it touching base again in the next week or as appropriate? So there's some of the pieces of the puzzle that I like to have together. And I can think of times where I've missed one of those steps and you think, I didn't set that up for success. My calendar wasn't forgiving enough to allow the time that it needed to. I had an upset staff member and then they had to rush off and teach period 2. Or I couldn't give it the time that it deserved because I then was heading to another meeting straight after. So some of those little things that I reflect onto.
So what are some of the strategies you can put in place to avoid that? They're all really valid points that you raise around not having enough time, having to rush off to a next meeting. For me, sometimes you'll have someone in quite an emotional state and they just want to come and unload a couple of things on you. And oftentimes it's not one issue, it's multiple that they're all packaging up in what they're saying. And so for me, one of the things I do is listen, and you try and be present in the moment, knowing that you might have to rush off to a meeting in 5 minutes. And so you'll say to them, listen, I can see 2 issues here that are really important to you. I don't have the time right now to address either one, but why don't we schedule a meeting so that we can give these issues the time that they deserve? Now, one of 2 things happens then. A meeting is scheduled and you can address the issues and you can have the conversations that matter. Oftentimes, though, what happens is they don't schedule the meeting.
Because they found me instead.
They found you instead. Is that what happens?
No.
But in my experience, they've just wanted to unload a little bit. But what was important was my response in the moment to just stop and pause, even though I know that my calendar's full, and give them 60 seconds. And oftentimes that's enough. But in terms of missing the steps that you talked about in your process, how do you make sure that that doesn't happen in the future?
Deliberate and planned action. It's being really deliberate with your time as much as you can, or reflecting in the moment when these things pop into your calendar and you think, I've got no idea what this is about. Or if you've said, oh, hey, we really need to have this conversation. I'm not in at school tomorrow, or my day's looking chock-a-block. Do you have time? And vice versa. We do that with each other, depending on the situation. It's just being deliberate and thoughtful about, if I was in, as we were reflecting earlier, If that was me receiving this at 3:30 on a Friday, or back in the day when we were in those roles and potentially being called into the principal's office or the associate principal's office, how can we set that up for success? And we talk about with our team, particularly with exec and with our middle leaders as well, how to have those conversations in the moment so it doesn't escalate. If it's gotten to the point where it needs to sit with us, sometimes it does. But how do we avoid that? How do we avoid the snowball or the track switching that I like to call it, jumping between the train tracks when, hang on a minute, we started at issue 1 and now we're at issue 5 and none of these things are being dealt with, or it's all news in that moment. So how do we avoid that?
But I think what I'm taking away from your process and knowing how you operate is that you can have these really difficult conversations, but you can do them in a really respectful and kind way by approaching them with empathy and curiosity, which is absolutely vital. But not all conversations that we need to have are of that nature. Sometimes they're like realigning expectations. Sometimes they can be performance-based, behavioural. So there's all types of different conversations, but it's making sure that you're continually having them, because otherwise you're going to get frustrated and you're going to get frustrated with others, and then that's not a healthy, productive environment to cultivate high-performing teams. So you talked about the growth coaching training that we've done with staff here, and we've had 150 staff go through our Learning to Lead program. And a lot of that growth coaching work was around using a coaching approach to having difficult conversations. So providing a framework for staff to really latch onto so that they sort of feel that they've got a framework to operate within when they're having these sorts of conversations with their staff. And we know that the growth framework is around goals, reality, options, way forward, tactics and habits. There are so many other frameworks that you can use. And one of the frameworks that I came across last year when I was in Oxford, I had the pleasure of spending a day with a woman by the name of Sarah Rosenthaler. And it was one of the best days that I had in Oxford, actually.
Why don't you talk briefly about your experience before you jump into that? Because you were there, it was an immersive program.
So I was 28 days at the Sade Business School at Oxford University doing their advanced leadership and management program. And it was a residential program. And it was essentially an executive MBA condensed into 28 days with 45 leaders from around the world and all different industries and sectors. I was a student with the CFO at Amazon UK. I was rubbing shoulders and working alongside people who have 50,000 employees in their organisation, CEOs, CFOs, CTOs across almost every industry from almost every country around the world. And it was one of the most incredible experiences that I've ever had in my life, because talk about having conversations that matter. That was the whole essence of the program. It started with the provocation of, what do you need to leave behind to become the leader that you both want and need to be? So the whole 28 days was intense self-reflection, conversations with people, vulnerability. You had grown men who had only just met each other sharing openly things that they perhaps had never even shared with their wife, and crying, emotions. And it was one of the most profound experiences. They provided a container, is the actual language that they use at Oxford. They provided a container, which is basically a space that was psychologically safe and provided people with time to be able to engage in a process of self-transformation. So that was really, really powerful. Listen, it was long hours. It was compulsory fitness sessions in the morning. Most days were 12 to 14 hours. You had case studies, lectures, assignments. You'd do a 14-hour day and then you'd have an assignment that was due at 8 o'clock the next day in the morning. And it's like...
And you had to read 150 pages to even get the...
When am I going to get time to do that? One of the days that we spent there was with this woman called Sarah Rosenthaler, and having done a lot of work in the coaching space for almost a decade, I feel quite competent taking a coaching approach to my leadership work. So When I saw on the program that Sarah was going to be talking about her approach to coaching and having conversations, I didn't really give it much thought, and somewhat arrogantly, I've done all this sort of work before. There's probably not going to be too many takeaways here for me, but I'll embrace it with an open mind. But I was really, really blown away because she has this premise of you have a very simple framework that can assist you in discussing what really matters. And her framework is very simple. It's 4 steps that anyone can use to better tackle conversations that you probably are dreading. The first step is find your ground, which is what you were referring to before in terms of the preparation, all those sorts of really important things before you have the conversation. The second step in her framework is building a bridge. And what she means by that is actually creating rapport. And so she talks about different ways that you can do that. Her next step is reading the room and then intervening effectively.
Professional judgment.
Professional judgment, but also being in the moment so that you've got enough awareness about how things are happening to be able to change them if you need to. Because you could do all the pre-planning and all the scenario work and all the thinking, this is how this conversation is going to go, and I'm going to ask this question and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. All your plans are going to go out the window if the conversation goes in a slightly different direction. If there's emotions involved, anything could happen. So it's about being able to read the room and then change your plan accordingly.
And that's that active listening. Oh, it sounds so throwaway and so token, but genuinely listening.
Genuinely listening and coming from that place of curiosity, because then her 4th pillar in her framework is holding space to navigate conflict. And I think that's the bit that was the really transformative piece for me, because in the busyness of our day-to-day, you might say, I've got half an hour to have this conversation and I'm going to wrap it up in half an hour.
Or 20 minutes and then I get 10 minutes up my sleeve.
Right.
Yeah.
And the danger in doing that is that you just skim over the surface and you don't really get to the heart of whatever the issue is or the conversation that needs to be had. It's really common in my experience. You and I are going to sit down, we're going to talk about an issue or a particular matter. We skim the surface, we both smile at each other. Thanks, Teagan. See you next time. But we don't really get into the heart of the matter because we haven't allowed enough time and space, and we haven't provided a mechanism for us both to be able to really mine for conflict and to really navigate that between us so that we leave no stone unturned.
Or you think you're about to have a difficult conversation and this person walks in to your office and they say, I know we've got an hour together, but I actually have to duck off at 9:30 instead of 10. And then you think, oh, well, there goes that conversation.
Right. So I guess there's so many different frameworks that you can use. When it comes down to it, it's about being a master communicator, listening deeply and holding space for the conversation. And if you do that, I think you can work through most things.
And I'd add a final step is that reflective piece, at the end of the day. And this is something I like to do on my drive home. I've got a little bit of a commute as well, and spending time in the car thinking, how was I today in my interactions and in the conversations that mattered? How did I show up? And it's not about ruminating or thinking too long about it, but just that reflection piece at the end of each day. Did I miss something? Did it land? Did I show up in the right way? Just those little touch points, that reflective practice, which we all say is so important. But how do we actually hold space for that reflection within each day?
It's an ongoing challenge, but I think we're on the right track. And my advice for our listeners is you have to have the conversation. One of our leadership principles is kill your own snakes. And what we mean by that is that things shouldn't be handballed up the chain of command, so to speak, escalated right to the top. They should be managed at the appropriate level. And we've done a lot of work to make sure that people are equipped with the skills to be able to do that. And I think that's having some impact, but it's a work in progress. And the challenge for you and I is to not take those issues on unnecessarily and to continue to align our expectations of people having the conversations that matter when they matter at the appropriate level of the school.
Helping them to work through it too.
Right.
There's a good example that has helped me in my journey of not taking the monkey off someone else's back and collecting the monkeys on my back is when someone comes into your office and inevitably I've got an issue with X or this person or this parent or this student, over to you. Or looking for advice or looking for you to take that on. And I say, well, how did they respond when you had the conversation with them? And often there's a big long pause because the conversation hasn't been had.
Right.
And we talk about no triangles, cutting the triangle out of our work. So it is direct peer-to-peer or colleague to colleague or colleague to student or whatever it may be.
The last thing anyone wants in a school environment, in a business, in an organisation, is for that situation where a colleague will come to you and complain about someone else. Now, if it's a serious enough complaint and it needs to be formalised and there's a process, that's different.
Different story.
That's different. But if someone's just coming to you to do an informal complaint or to whinge about someone else, what's your first response?
How did they react when you had this conversation, or how did they take your feedback?
And 95% of the time, I bet you they say, I haven't spoken to them yet. So then what do you say?
So when are you going to have the conversation with them?
Right. It's not rocket science, right? It's a lot of common sense, but people don't like to have the conversations because it's unnatural. It's uncomfortable, but it's a habit and it's a skill that can be learned.
And when we come back to why it's so important to do the good work that we want to do, we all have to be on the same page and moving past the minutiae that bogs us down in human-centred workplaces such as schools. How do we cut through so that we can get on to do the good work and remember why we're here, which is for the benefit of our young people?
Couldn't agree more. I guess we've talked about having conversations that matter almost through the lens of the negative, which is predominantly where they need to be had. But I think there's space to have conversations that matter in the positive as well. And one example I'm thinking of is you identify a high potential young teacher who you believe should be aspiring to a leadership role within your school. You need to be having a conversation with them to say, I see you and I value your growth and development and I want to provide a pathway for you. So let's have a conversation. What other conversations need to be had through that positive lens?
I can think of the work that I do with our vice captains of the school, and we have a fortnightly morning tea together. And for me, that's one of the highlights of my fortnight is the time that I get with our two vice captains to touch base with them, what's on their mind, what's important to them, what's happening in their worlds personally, but also representing the prefect group. And to me, that's a conversation that really matters. Can think about the passing conversations that you have with students in the yard. And we've talked about visibility, how important it is. But a young man springs to mind that has found himself in some troubling situations here over the past 2 years that's been on my radar. And he and I haven't had a great relationship. When I say we haven't had a great relationship, there's probably not been much depth. And we were walking past each other the other day and we stopped and had a conversation and he asked me how my little boy was going. And it was just, I saw his eyes light up. He's got a younger sibling, not the same age, but he's been through that with his family. And we connected on that level. And I walked past him yesterday and he said, hey, miss, are you coming to the soccer game this afternoon? And I said, yeah, of course. Can't wait. I'll be there. And thought that really matters. Those conversations are ones that really matter. Students have been seen, they've been heard, they've been valued.
And they know you know them. They're not just a number. They're not just an ATAR. You know them.
What about for you? What other conversations matter in the positive?
It depends on your perspective or your interpretation of it. I consider this to be looking through the lens of the positive, but I know some people think it might be somewhat negative. It's something I say at the start of every year in my staff principal's address. And it goes along the lines of life is so short. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so because of that, don't be stuck in a workplace where you're not happy. So if you're not happy here, and that's okay, because this place is not for everybody. We've got 500 staff. We can't keep everyone happy all the time. It's not possible. But we're doing some great stuff here. People come first. We're constantly looking for ways to improve our workplace conditions. Professional learning, innovation opportunities, passion projects, opportunities for career advancement, flexible work. There are so many good things about this place. But if it's not for you, that's okay. Come have a conversation with me and help me help you I'll utilize my networks and we'll find you a position in a place where you think you'll be happier. No grudges, nothing to see here. I'll be your reference. Let's just have an adult conversation and let's move forward. I see that as a real positive.
Do people take you up on it?
I've had one person take me up on it in 3 years that I've been saying it.
And did it go well?
It did go well. It did go well. Now, for me, that's a conversation that matters because we want a fantastic, positive workplace culture where we talk to people, we provide opportunity, we support, we empower. We create the best place that we can possibly create here for people.
And that's where context is really important because in other schools or other workplaces, the context for that conversation may not be appropriate.
Right. So I see that as a really positive conversation that really matters because I'm opening a door. Now, I know the first year that I said it, there was a little bit of feedback that I heard secondhand, third hand from staff who were a little bit taken aback by that.
It's pretty direct.
But it has to be. And I firmly believe it. Because the minute I'm not happy in my role, I'll be looking for my next one. Thankfully, I'm really, really happy.
That was my next question. While we're live.
Yeah. Now, you can't be happy all the time.
No.
Like, we're not talking about some utopian fantasy where we're walking around dancing, holding each other's hands.
It's unrealistic.
It's unrealistic. But generally, if you're happy in your workplace and you take your ups and downs, the natural ebbs and flows and the cycle of the year, but if you're generally happy, you're going to be resilient and you're going to be able to deal with the ups and the downs. But if you're unhappy, you're looking at things in a pessimistic way and everything is bad. Why would you want to subject yourself to that when you spend 40, 50 hours a week in your workplace? That must be horrendous.
And it could just be the wake-up call people need. I'm going to take agency over my life and do something about it.
Yeah.
It could be what resonates for that one person. Well, that one person it did. And I'm sure they're in a much better place than what they were at the time.
I hope so, because I genuinely believe that life is short. So don't waste your time being in situations that don't make you happy.
An extension of that in a positive lens, perhaps, which could be perceived in the negative. I can think of conversations we've had with some of our direct reports or staff over the years around, is this the right role for you right now? Or from a career perspective, is there another role on your horizon that is not here? And that may be contextual, it may be timing, it may be a multitude of different reasons. The saying that you say and that I've taken from you is that if this isn't right for you right now, or you're ready to go on to the next thing and for whatever reason we can't provide that opportunity for you, so then let's help you find what it is and we'll be your biggest cheerleader.
Yeah.
We'll be your biggest advocate. We'll be your number one reference, of course, because they probably deserve a really glowing reference. Let's help you with your CV. Do you need a coach from an interview perspective? Let's go through some interview questions ahead of your first interview and navigate that process, which I certainly have been on the positive end on for me in being able to be open with my direct report. So in the past and say, this role has come up. I think it's a great opportunity. I'd love to throw my hat in the ring, and then we workshop it together. Rather than being afraid to have that conversation with your boss, if you like, for fear of consequence.
The old mentality from a senior leader's perspective is that you don't want your people to leave. And you don't. You want to keep your good people. It's about retention, being an employer of choice, attracting the good people, and then keeping them here. But we have a slightly different approach to that, which you've articulated, which is that we're going to provide you with best-in-class professional development opportunities so that you can grow and develop while you're here and hopefully move into a position of leadership here. But if it is somewhere else, we will support you and we will celebrate that and there will be no hard feelings. That's a different mindset. That is a different mindset.
And it can be hard.
It can be hard because sometimes you lose good people.
Yeah.
But you have to trust the process and be people's biggest cheerleaders, as you said, and be their advocates because somewhat altruistically, you're making a systems-wide contribution. But more importantly, you're setting someone up on a pathway for success somewhere else. And that's a great thing.
Beautiful. Giving them the opportunities that they deserve.
Let's go into the trenches, Teagan.
Please.
So this segment of the podcast is where we talk about a specific personal example or story related to the episode topic. And so can you think of a time in your career where someone's had a conversation with you that's really mattered?
I can think of many, but I can think of one example where I come from a health phys ed sporting background as a budding start to my profession. And it was always my dream to be head of sport. It was always my dream. And I thought at the time, back then when I was the ripe old age of probably 19 or 20 or however old I was when I came to this profound realization that this was my calling and what I wanted to do. And I thought, God, I'd love to be a head of sport. And when I'm 40 or 50 or however old, thinking that's so far away, that's my end goal, my end game. And I was really fortunate to have the opportunity. When I was younger, I was given a chance, and I can't remember my exact age, but it was certainly before the age of 25 where I was appointed to head of sport. And I thought to myself, wow, this was my end game. And now I'm here. How lucky am I? And loved the job. Anyway, life took me through different turns and steps, and someone sat down with me and said, well, when you're principal one day. And no one had ever said that to me before. And I'd never even entertained the idea or concept of being a principal, because all I'd ever hoped or imagined myself, and I'd put this glass ceiling on myself to say, well, I'm happy being a head of sport for the rest of my life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That was my hope and dream. And this person, and it wasn't a question of if, she was so forceful in her language and direct in her language of, oh, when you are, Teagan. And that's changed the whole trajectory of my life. It changed my goals, my ambitions, the way I thought about myself, the way I thought about where my life could go and where it could take me. And that conversation really mattered. And I don't think she would have thought twice about it.
But she saw something in you, and a really subtle conversation that she had with you when you're a principal one day.
And it wasn't a career conversation. It wasn't to do with my trajectory. It wasn't to do with employment. We must have been reflecting on a situation, and she was talking about how I would manage it, I think, from memory, or how I could manage it in future. And she was reflecting on, well, when you're in that situation, you'll be able to make those decisions. So that was a really important conversation for me, and one that mattered.
Yeah, it's great.
What about you?
I think the one that I remember most vividly, funnily enough, I think I was in grade 6. So I went to a local government school and played with the local football team. And the coach of the under-12s football team was also the full-time school cleaner. And he had a little pokey office on the school grounds, and he was a bit of a cult figure because he was the football coach as well as the cleaner. Every recess time, pretty much the entire under-12s football team would try and squeeze themselves into his little office. And I'm talking, it was a cupboard. It barely fit one person, let alone 20 kids and an adult. But he used to keep his door open, and he used to sit there, and he used to hold court with these 20, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And I just always remember it. Anyway, one day, I think I was being a bit of a lad and perhaps being a little bit naughty, which I know is hard to believe. He pulled me aside, and it was the first time that I'd ever saw him get a little bit angry. I'd say a little bit angry, because his number one technique when he was coaching football was that he would never yell. He would never raise his voice, but he'd cross his arms and he'd look at the ground and he'd start tapping his foot. The kids would then just self-organise, shh, quiet, because they'd almost be scared of him because that was his thing, right? So anyway, so when he pulled me aside and he was a little bit angry, I was a little bit shocked. And he said, listen, Adrian, you're going to either end up in jail or you could be the Prime Minister. And it's up to you based on the decisions you make. And I was like, shit.
What am I going to jail for? Running in the corridor.
Right. But it was just that moment in time where he probably saw something in me. And for him, that wasn't his responsibility. He was the cleaner. And it was during the school day. It wasn't even at footy training. But he pulled me aside and basically gave me a talking to. I don't know if it changed my behaviours in the future, but it was something that really stuck with me, and something that resonated, and something that I still remember. It's up to you. It's the choices you make.
It can change the trajectory of your life. It can have such a profound influence. You know, you often say that the negative 5% consumes 95% of our days. And we can get so bogged down in that. And it's a bit of a utopian mindset perhaps, but there's so much good.
There's so much good, and we can never lose sight of that. We need to constantly reframe our experiences around the amazing things that are happening daily with staff, with students, with families, with our alumni, and the great things that we're doing collectively as a school to really drive the school forward and deliver on our strategy.
I know that you'll know exactly who I'm talking about, and I've heard you say this to someone that we both worked with and has been a mentor to both of us. As a previous principal for a very long time, very wise man, and he says that it's the best job in the world with some of the toughest days.
And never a truer word spoken.
Be a nice place to leave it.
I think so. Teagan, really enjoyed the conversation.
Always a pleasure.
That's a wrap on today's episode of The Principal's Perspective. We hope this conversation gave you practical insights to lead with clarity, confidence, and impact.
Leadership is a continuous journey, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Dr. Adrian Camm and Teagan Collins and let us know your thoughts, questions, or leadership wins.
Make sure to follow The Principal's Perspective on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone in your network.
Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and we'll see you in the next episode. You can be sure to find any references, books, or resources we